Welcome to this special edition of SoCal Connected. I'm Val Zavala. Tonight I'm at the University of Southern California for a unique California conversation. Governor Jerry Brown will be speaking with the publisher of the Los Angeles Times. The subject, water. Most simply, water can make or break California. We have built one of the most expansive water delivery systems on the planet. It has served us well for decades. But now we're in the fourth year of a severe drought. Snowpacks are a fraction of normal. Reservoirs are dangerously low. Farmers are drilling deeper for groundwater that is quickly disappearing. At the helm of the crisis is Governor Jerry Brown. He has ordered a first-ever 25% mandatory water cutback. But what will get watered and what will be left to die? Are there solutions? Is desalination the answer? What happens if the drought continues? Tonight we learn from the governor himself about the forces and politics that control Northern and Southern California water. Governor Brown will be interviewed by Austin Beutner, CEO and publisher of the Los Angeles Times and the San Diego Union Tribune. The discussion will also include questions from the public.
Before we get into ways we can use water differently, Mr. Governor, is it fair to assume there's nothing coming like the magnitude of new supply, and obviously efficient use can be supply, but new supply like we saw from the Colorado River project, for instance? Is it fair to assume in the next 10 or 20 years there's nothing of that magnitude coming for us?
Most of the good river sites that would be good for a dam have already been located and dams have been built there. So yes, there's some remaining wild rivers, but they're locked up under congressional and state authority. So I would say it's fair to say there's no silver bullet or big new river source that could be a source of additional water. We are totally dependent on the snow melt, on Mother Nature for the rain that comes. Down the road, of course, there's the ocean, and if you have a long enough horizon and you expect technology to improve, there will be plenty of water. But that doesn't mean plenty of water in the next 5 or 10 years. We're still dependent on the current system, which is wells, which is recycling and reusing, and the aqueduct and the various other local sources that Californians use.
All right. Let's try to dimension the problem a little bit, because I think one thing I've observed is it's hard in a state as big as this to issue a call to action and get people to understand the magnitude of what we're dealing with. And if the overall supply in the state is about 60 million acre feet, about 20 of that goes for environmental use, about 80% of the rest for agriculture, about 20% for residential and commercial use. Would you think of this as a 1 or 2% problem when it comes to usage today, or something more like a 15 or 20% problem in terms of what our baseline is versus what our sustainable resource pool looks like?
Well, the way you frame that question has within it one of the great dilemmas. What are we talking about? How many people? How many almond orchards? How many buildings? How many swimming pools? And how many of the other 100 uses that you could conceive of? We have 39 million people. We could have 49 million people. We will. And on our straight line, we need a lot more water. So whatever scenario you have, we need to use the water in what I would call an elegant and efficient way. And that means you use it and you reuse it, and you don't overuse it. And technology and wise use can bring that about.
All right. Climate change, I assume, going to make it worse.
Climate change is going to make it worse, and I think you can take this drought as a foretaste of what will be occurring frequently with the climate changing. The temperatures are higher in California, and the drought is a manifestation of less water. But warming is a manifestation of higher temperatures. When you put the two together, which did not happen when we had the great drought in the 20s, you get drier soils, drier forests, drier vegetation, more forest fires, more beetle infestations, more vectors coming from hotter climates, big trouble that we don't fully even imagine. So the main point about climate change, it is a radical disruption of the age-old historic patterns of climate. And as that changes, scientists can tell us some things, like rising sea level, extreme weather events, differential impacts in the West, where it's going to be worse than it is in perhaps Canada. But we don't know where the tipping point is, and we don't know what feedback loops will be activated such that outcomes can be far more devastating and in an irreversible way. And that's why people have looked at this. When I say people, I mean well over 90 to 95% of climate scientists worldwide. I mean the Scientific Academy of Russia, of Germany, of England, of France, of Italy, of China, of the United States, of Canada, of Japan. All these scientific academies, representing the very best in scientific thinking, have all identified climate change as human caused and as having these longer term consequences. Key point, we don't know all the consequences. They are not linear. We're at 400 parts per million greenhouse gases today, considerably higher than before the industrial period began. When are we beyond the point where temperatures will rise and then feed on themselves? For example, as you melt the ice in the Arctic, or rather in Antarctica and in Greenland, what was white and reflective becomes dark in the water of the ocean. Then the temperature rises from that and deforestation, and then you could get the release of methane in the tundra. And as you get the release of methane, which is 20 or 30 times more powerful than CO2, you're going to get more heat. And then the more heat will generate changes in currents. And you can just imagine an absolute catastrophic impact on humanity. This is a crisis that it's not like a political problem, Republicans, Democrats, conservatives, liberal. This goes to the very foundation of what it is to be human in a world of living things. So this really goes to the heart of things. And the drought is just a tiny, tiny foretaste of what's to come. And that's why we have to make use of this to respond in a very creative, thoughtful way, because we have technology impacting our environment, the atmosphere, the rise of the generation of heat-trapping gases. And the question is, will our wisdom, our ability to use this technology to compensate and correct for the climate impacts, will the wisdom accelerate at the same rate as the technological innovation? At this point, that's a very open question.
Right,
in fact, probably less likely than not. So we really are very challenged.
All right, so to take it back to water, it's safe to say then we've got to change our behaviors 15 or 20%, not 1 or 2%, to get through this drought. Let me put some context, and that's fair to say? Is that a...
Yeah, well, the reason I linked in climate change, this drought may be over in a year or two, or if it's like some droughts in history, it could go on for 10 years or longer. So we've got to deal with what we have, and then we have to see it in the context. What if this is the new normal and it's going to keep getting worse? So I think this is a great opportunity for science, for government, for business to pull together and develop some good thought out responses and keep building on that as we go forward.
Okay. Let's put this in context. I mentioned those 30-year projects. Historically, the federal government's had a heavy hand in water infrastructure in the making of the West, including funding. That paradigm shifted, and Cadillac Desert and lots of other good authors have chronicled the role the federal government had in the big infrastructure and the paying of it. Today, about 85% of water is paid for locally, so the funding shifted, almost inverted from what it used to be. I think I've seen estimates between 3,000 and 4,000 different agencies involved in water, from regulatory to distribution and billing in the state. How do you, as our chief executive, bring order to that apparent chaos in a time of crisis?
Well, first and foremost from the State Water Board, which has overall authority and sets ground rules that all these many water agencies have to follow. I think there's only 60 or 80 water agencies that account for the vast majority of the water used in California. And then also getting the legislature, them working with my administration to pass Proposition 1, get a bond issue, but a bond issue not as a group of little projects to please various interest groups, but rather a set of projects that coherently are part of a water action plan, which we have a water action plan. So that's how we come to grips. Now, there are lots of special districts and water districts. I don't think that, we have over 400 cities in California too, but we still manage to deal with things. So the real key thing is the big picture, conservation in the urban areas, better management of our groundwater, and continuous innovation on the part of agriculture. And then, of course, as you mentioned, all this local funding. It's going to take a lot of money, and you're going to see it in your water bills. We have to develop recycling and stormwater capture and rainwater capture and all the different ways we can take water and use it again and use it again. And if you think of the metaphor of spaceship Earth, if you're in a spaceship, you reuse everything. I mean, they can't get any water when they're out in space. Well, we're in space, and we're going to have to find a way to reuse. And with enough science and enough time and enough funding, we'll get it done. But a lot of heavy lifting is going to be done by the local water districts, and that will show up in your water bill.
So Sun Valley locally here has a really innovative program where they're taking water off roofs. They've redone how they think of roads, so it percolates towards the aquifer. And all-in cost is maybe $300 an acre foot. So cost-effective, recycling, as you said, being efficient. Is there a path for projects like that to scale? So how do other municipalities learn about that? Are there other funding streams they might tap into to help a project like that take hold across the state?
Well, some of the funding will come from the $7.5 billion water bond. Some of the funding will come from local bonds. Some of the funding will come from local fees. Orange County has a state-of-the-art recycling plant that is very impressive. And yeah, I think many of these things can be scaled up. It's just a question of valuing these projects as something that needs to be done. And there's always an inertia. There's a hurdle cost here. You've got to overcome the barrier of putting up the initial funding. It is going to be local, but we do have the state bond, and maybe the federal government will rejoin the problem. They certainly rejoined the solution. They certainly were very, at the time of the Depression, California wanted to build the Central Valley Water Project, and they didn't feel they could raise the money. And so that's when the federal government came in and created the Central Valley Water Project. Originally, that was a state program that proved inadequate, and the feds came in. So I wouldn't roll them out again.
Good. Let's go back to the state a minute. Let's talk about the tunnel project in the Bay Delta. So it's about a 1,000-mile square estuary at the confluence of the Sacramento River from the north and the San Joaquin from the south. And naturally, it would flow east to west out to the Pacific Ocean. Pumping system takes it north to south through the Delta. We've seen the consequence. We've seen the consequence both in terms of destruction of habitat. We've seen the uncertainty it provides in terms of security of supply. And so your administration taking leadership on this has shown us a path to tunnel beneath. That's something I know you want to talk about, but one of the questions I have, in addition to the plumbing and what that will do for security and in a sense serve as an insurance policy against the levees breaking and incursion of more salt water into that system, how does something like that get, once built, how's it governed? Who or what is going to decide what's appropriate use to preserve and protect habitat versus flowing south? And is this a scheme where the south is going to take again from the north? How's this going to be governed once it's built? And you may want to talk about the plumbing part of it too.
That is the basic nature of any kind of project. Somebody has to be in charge. People are in charge right now. The federal government and the State Department of Water Resources manages the flow of water through the aqueduct and through the projects. And they have made, I think, almost 700,000 acre feet available for farmers in the Fresno Central Valley area. But they have to be very careful about the fish and about the general health of that ecosystem. And they are managing that. And there are scientific opinions that for salmon, actually for smelt as well, these did not exist 30 years ago when I proposed a similar project called the Peripheral Canal in 1981. They exist today, and they have the force of federal law, and they're very powerful, very controlling opinions that limit water. And the project as it functions today is destroying the salmon, is destroying other species, and long-term will never be acceptable. So the water project will be shut off if there is some way is not found to both protect the fish and ensure the reliable supply of water. That needs a governing system, and that government, I think, would be similar to what we have now. We have a state water board that sets rules on water quality, the mixture of seawater and fresh water and how saline it can be. We have the federal government and all the controls of the national fishery departments. So we have expert bodies that are totally committed to managing these conflicts, and there are conflicts. Some people who live in the Delta, they love the fact that water just flows through and they can take all they want, whether their water rights justify that or not. But still, in very wet years, a tremendous amount of water is used by no one. It goes out to the ocean, and it can't be captured. But in order to capture it, you do need storage, and you need a proper system. And the proper system can't be the current pumping system, which, because of these reverse flows, they're killing the fish. And at some point, that will stop the project. Just the values that people have. You may say, well, what's a fish compared to a farmer? That simplifies and distorts the equation. It's the very system of life forms and the pattern of living things that we are a part of. And as people understand a destructive force, they'll stop it. Now, with the tunnels, you can take the water before it gets into the delta. You can take it and put it under these pipeline or tunnels, whatever you want to call them, and you can then get it into the aqueduct without any of these reverse flows and without the destruction of fish. So in many ways, even though you'll hear some environmentalists say something different, the project, the delta conveyance, is to protect the habitat, to protect the species. That's what it's all about, as well as utilizing water that is now not utilized by anyone. So that's why this project has been around. And I tweeted out once the environmental assessments. I asked that they be brought into my office. This is the result of about 7 years of analysis, over $200 to $250 million. Every conceivable alternative consequence outcome that the mind of any scientist that was available has been enshrined in this massive set of volumes that would go from here to that podium. And that's just the environmental analysis. Then I've now added to that all the thousands of comments. And now very soon we're going to add our responses to the tens of thousands of comments to be added to the huge set of volumes that took 1 million man-hours to create. So what I'm saying is the best thinkers we have come up with the best alternative they can. Now, this is something my father was thinking about when he had the water plant. So there's not a lot of new ideas out there. And that's why this is the time, now or never, to get it done, or that water is going to be shut down at some point. Or if not shut down, you may have the levees fail because of rising sea level, with the intrusion of salt water, because of earthquake, or because of extreme weather events. If that occurs, then it's not just Southern California that will be have a real devastating impact, because so much of the water now is coming from the aqueduct, but so will the city of Livermore in Northern California, in Alameda County, and so will Silicon Valley. People talk about how powerful the economic engine of Silicon Valley. Well, it won't be powerful the day the levees break and 40% of the water is unusable for Silicon Valley. That will be a very bad day for California. And it won't be a few billion or a few tens of billions. It'll be hundreds of billions of dollars in economic dislocation. It's a complete catastrophe. And that's why the project that we have needs to go forward. And I think that's what it will when people of goodwill take a look at it.
So So within the millions of man and woman hours and comments, and being in the newspaper business, we get a lot of comments, some of which aren't worth repeating, but some of which are worth looking at very carefully.
Well, they've all been read by somebody. Not me, however.
Exactly to my point. So is there somewhere in there this governance system we're talking about? Is there a layperson in this audience might see 2 or 3 pages which codifies
Yes.
the rules of the road? Where would one look to find that?
Well,
And how it's going to be governed and how
we'll send you a copy tomorrow. Obviously, water is being managed, and how much water flows is now dictated by federal biological opinions. They set the ground rules. And when people say, let's put more water through the aqueduct, scientists look at what's the impact on various species that depend on the delta. And if scientists say you can't push that water through, or you have to let it flow in a certain way to protect the species, that's what happens. Now, I think the Water Board has a central role in that, as does the Department of Water Resources. Somebody has to decide. You can't, well, I don't know what you could do. You can't put it out to a lottery, and you can't write it in some kind of code because you have to manage on a daily basis the unpredictability of weather. So that is one, you put your finger on one of the key concerns. Some people want to put the Water Board totally in control, and other people say, wait a minute, the Department of Water Resources knows how to allocate water. They have to have a role. So this is a matter that bears scrutiny, and I think we'll discuss this as we get down the road and get closer to the actual completion of the whole project. Completion of the permit. I shouldn't say completion of the project. That's going to take years. We're still a good year away from completing the environmental analysis and saying, now, the environmental impact report is okay, it's certified, and we can now get a permit. That will take place, and then there'll be lawsuits. And so I think there's plenty of time to probe these various ideas as to how to manage this thing. This is not small potatoes. This is not for the faint of heart. This has defied 5 governors and 40 years. We're getting it. Well, I will say this is the time to get it. If we don't get it this time, it could be another 40 years. And another 40 years, the world and the climate's going to look very different.
All right, let's shift to groundwater a little bit. I saw a statistic in a newspaper over the weekend in Tulare County. So Tulare being sort of at the foot of the San Joaquin. First 4 months of this year, 600 well permits drawn versus 5 years ago, 60. And I remember in my youth, something called the Scorpion Bowl from Trader Vic's, which emanates from, I guess, Oakland. The original Scorpion Bowl comes from Oakland. So it's a big drink with 4 straws. And college-age kids figure out you sip quicker than somebody next to you, you get more than your fair share. You've tried to address that, and I think legislation, really for the first time in California, there is legislation about groundwater. Tell us a little bit about that, how it's meant to work, when we'll start to see the impact of it.
Well, to indicate just how challenging managing groundwater is, California's never had, up until last year, a groundwater management regime. When it came time to vote on it, invariably, those who represented agricultural areas voted no. They also happen to be mostly Republican, but that's beside the point, or maybe not. The urban areas that were Democrat voted yes, but because we have the Democratic majority, we got the program. Now, in order to make it more palatable, we didn't have a top-down state control. Rather, we set in motion the formation of committees in each county. These are committees that counties will form of interested parties who will work out the ground rules for their county. And so far, that they're doing this. Some counties are more advanced than others. If they don't get their act together, at some point, now we've set it at 10 years, but it could be accelerated, the state can intervene and impose its own rules. We're waiting for locals because, as you say, 4 straws. If you're sitting in Tulare County and there's dozens of straws going into the wells around your farm, you're going to be concerned about that. And so people will, I think, rise to the occasion. And I have no evidence to suggest otherwise, but we do have the backup of ultimate state intervention.
And so you're saying we can pull it forward, because I've seen NASA now has the capability to measure the aquifer depth and the change from the sky, and I think the last several years it's been dropping about 8 million acre feet a year. How soon, if you needed to, or if state leadership thought we needed to, could you pull forward some of the impact of that work?
Well, that's a very good question. You have to understand, water in California, by historic understanding, is a property. It's a property right, and people are jealously guard those rights. And also, land is a right. You know, your house is your castle, your farm is your livelihood, and so people have been very wary to give government some kind of free entryway to start saying, okay, you can't drill that well, or you can't take any more water out. We're going to a regime where the underground water needs to be managed. We have an overdraft, particularly in this time of drought. I think we have time. It's not the end of the world for the next couple of years, but we don't have endless amounts of time. So we have to get a regime of conservation, of very efficient use of all the ways we deploy water. So in that context, the regulation of groundwater will be part of that. I have to say, when you regulate something as precious as water on someone's own land, and that person is a conservative Republican, it doesn't go down well. It doesn't go down easy. So that's why, in order to make this all work, we are moving in steps. And so far, I think people, even the Farm Bureau and other places, they recognize that they've got to do something. What that something is different if you're sitting in Los Angeles or you're sitting in Gridley or Fresno. So I would say we're moving forward. Whether it's fast enough, ask me in another year and I'll have a better understanding of where we are.
All right. Let me jump off that point about what the role we can all individually play, or each community in which we reside has to step up and do their part. Let's figure out the balance between urban and agriculture for a moment. So if 20% is urban, and let's jump ahead, and I know you're at MWD talking about a great program they have to replace lawns with different turf and use water less. Let's assume we took that 7% and just cut it in half. So every lawn disappeared. We've now taken, of the 100%, about 3%. So we're down to 97. Is it fair to say this is something every bit of California has to engage in? Whether you're a farmer, whether you're in business, even the environmental community, all have to come to that same table? Because I'm just trying to make the math work.
Yeah, well, everybody has to. It's a bit complicated for any kind of glib or premature answer. People talk about how much water almonds take, or walnuts, or alfalfa. But I've heard that a steak takes about 400 gallons. So as part of the drought strategy to reduce meat consumption, this thing is a bit complicated. If you're growing almonds and you're selling them on the export market, you're bringing capital and revenue into California. That's a good thing. If you have a golf course and people are playing, and that's all enterprise, that can be a good thing. So how do we, and a good number of farmers are using top technology in terms of restricting wasteful use, but a lot of them haven't. And they haven't because their cost of water is rather low. So we've got a lot to do, and how this will shape out, it's too early to tell. Depending, I mean, if the crisis continues and gets bad, more drastic things will be done. But when people say, okay, stop the almonds, stop the steak, stop this, stop that, then you're starting to pick and choose in a invasive way that government isn't so good at, and it would be impossible to forge a consensus. So what we're doing through the water bond, through the water action plan, through the incentives, the Metropolitan Water District just put up, I think, $400 million or more to remove water overly consumptive vegetation. All that's good. I think we do need we need as many changes as we can. Now, when you say, well, the farmers have all this water, so why don't they not use it? They are part of the productive aspect of California. Now, you really want to, if you pose that question, how many people should be in California? Because at some point, if we had 60 million people, maybe showers would be the problem. So it's not just almonds, it's people and how people live. So we can adjust through innovation, but we can only adjust at a certain pace. You can't, and so we're in kind of a race here between our technical ability to change, adapt, and the worsening of the drought. Plus, we're bringing in more people, and many more ways are discovered all the time on how to use water. So, like every other species, we have to adapt to whatever the environment is that we're thrown into. And we adapt or we disappear. So that adaptation is what's going on. If we don't do anything about climate change, in another 100 years, we may not adapt. So different people, depending upon how they're looking at it, would say the pace has to be quickened. And I agree with that. We have to quicken it. But when you have 39 million people with as diverse a view as people in Orange County versus people in Santa Monica versus people in San Francisco versus people in Modoc, consensus takes time. If you look at the trouble and difficulty in Washington or the Middle East, it's not a surprise that human beings of differing identities and beliefs argue and fight a lot before they come to agreement. I would say we're on pace to forge good policies going forward, but I think we're always open and interested in critique and how we might accelerate. So we're going to find out about the tunnels in the next couple of years. We'll find out about how our incentives that flow from the Proposition 1, 7.5 billion, and how people generally respond. And to some extent, the intensity of the drought will either accelerate or retard. That's what we're doing.
Well, I'm happy on a personal note to report, as a father of 4 teenagers, 3 of my boys are leading the charge on that shower reduction plan. So happy to take them on the road and instruct others. Let's talk about some of the dislocations that occur, because this is a commodity. Ultimately, water is a commodity. And I was just down in San Diego with some of our customers down there earlier this week and talking about the odd juxtaposition. So San Diego taking through the Imperial Irrigation District, water used for crops like alfalfa, and it's a thirsty crop. So about 10% of what California gets from the Colorado River is used for various crops. About 10% of that actually is for alfalfa shipped to China. Now those farmers have very senior rights, very long tenured rights, which gives them water about $20 an acre foot. An hour's drive, Carlsbad just commissioned a new desalinization plant. We've covered that, and I think the operating cost of that is about $2,400 an acre foot. So the San Diegans, in effect, will be paying $2,400 an acre foot for residential or industrial use, and an hour's drive, it's being used to cultivate alfalfa shipped to China, and China's just the coincidence.
Well, but some of that alfalfa is used for cows, and the cows are used for steak.
That's right, that's right.
So,
but one of the things, I don't know too many commodities in the course of an hour drive that jump 100-fold in price, other than things which are not lawful. So how does the San Diego community think of that greater community? Should there be a water market? Should there be some way to introduce a price signal or some equilibrium?
All right. You said water is a commodity, and I'd have to, before affirming that proposition, I'd want to think about it more. Right. Some people call water a right. Some people call water, the essence of life. Water, it's more than H2O. Water is the waters of the waters of baptism, the waters of poetry, and water has an iconic role in human history and human existence. So, how we play with water, it's not like a widget. It's a little different. Secondly, these water rights have evolved over time. Now, the beauty of economics is it's abstract, and you simplify reality and work out these equations. But life is embedded in history and changes very slowly. So how we use our water is not the idea of some great economist. It's the evolutionary result of 150 years of Californians coping with land and water and the challenges they face. So you don't, the Soviets had this idea they could reinvent humanity, create the new Soviet man, turn fields in the Siberia or wherever it was into wheat fields. They failed. So you've got to take, you have to have great respect for the way things are and the way they've been, and then you evolve in response to challenge. And the challenge now is the drought. People, for the first time, are raising questions about the water price. But in terms of your desalination, that is somewhat of a bold move. It is very expensive, but it's a small fraction of the San Diego water, and when they blend it in with everything else, it isn't as noticeable as if it were 100% desalination. And they're buying an insurance policy. In some way, they're trying to tell the Metropolitan Water District that they may want to be a little independent. And it's good if that were the only, if the technology never improved, you'd have to question whether that was a smart move. But somebody has to begin. It's very good that San Diego is beginning, and the costs will come down eventually. And as they come down, and as we use renewable energy, then desalination, I could envision as ultimately we have all the water we need. But we're not there yet, and we don't know how many years or decades it'll take to get there. So there is anomalies, but those anomalies are intrinsic to the fabric of California as a civilization. And we don't just rip them up because some economist tells us this is a commodity and it should flow in some market manner. No, things just don't work that way. Not everything is subject to market, although it's influenced by market. And I'm sure that if the drought continues, or maybe even if it doesn't, we'll find ways of making a more rational water system. And to tell you the truth, I want to give this more thought. Just as a political person, I hesitate to say, oh, I'm talking here in LA and I've just decided, let's throw all the water rights out the window. That somehow my political antenna, I say that is not a smart statement to make. So at the very least, I'm going to have to question this. And even though most of these water rights holders are Republicans, so I don't know why I'm so worried.
But the reason I raise it, to put it in context, and I want to talk about the rights, is if you just took the alfalfa sent to China to feed dairy cows and provide milk and beef cattle, the annual differential is about $750 million. And so there's an economic policy question for the state. You just can't see that dislocation be so large and sustain itself.
Well, but also, first of all, we have water contracts that are $7 an acre foot or $20 an acre foot, and the federal government, within the last, I don't know, last decade or so, has locked that in. Because life changes, but things get locked in that when you lock them in to the contract, oh, it's a 20-year contract, 30-year, it looks rational, but then 10 years later, it doesn't look rational. But we have something called contract, and contract secures expectations. And secure expectations is at the heart of an investment economy, and one that people can put money at risk knowing the rules of the road won't change too precipitously.
So let me take that a little further.
And I don't know, by the way, if the alfalfa goes to China, is that better or worse than if the alfalfa feeds cows and people have a hamburger tomorrow? I don't know. I mean, if you ask me, I think you should be eating veggie burgers, but that's not the predominant sentiment. So I think I get your point. All water. I mean, we have lifeline rates, don't we? We do protect different individuals. So
it's just such a stark contrast within that.
it is a stark contrast, and stark contrasts tend to stimulate change. What do they say about the nail? If it sticks out, you pound it down. So I'd say if you have massive amounts of water for 10 or 20 or $30 an acre foot, there will be others who are going to try to take it away from you.
So let's talk about what the right. So the history, as I understand in the state, you started with the riparian right, which means you're adjacent to a stream. Then in 1914, a new set of rules, first in time, first in right. So it doesn't have to be adjacent to a stream, could be shipped further away. That's how we think of the Colorado River. But an important thing occurred in 1928 with the amendment to the California Constitution, which was it awarded the state reasonable use for all surface and groundwater. Okay, and I'm going to pull this card up and read it because I think these words bear at least a little bit of conversation.
Now we're into abstruse water law.
Yeah.
So hold on.
Yeah, hold on. Well, at least there's one attorney on stage. So no water user in the state owns water. Rather, the state holds it in its capacity for benefit of the public. And now this is a quote, benefits to be balanced to include economic, recreational, aesthetic, and environmental. What is reasonable use in today's context?
I think relevant to your question is what happened at Mono Lake, or rather the water that LA takes from the Owens Valley.
Owens Valley, sure.
That Owens Valley water was subject to certain rights. The people from LA went up there under assumed names and they bought it all up and they started draining it. And then there was an attack through the law. And in the early 80s, the California Supreme Court ruled and almost discovered this public trust doctrine that said, well, LA, you may think you have that water, but you really don't. And now that water has been cut back through water use. So I would say the Supreme Court does have the power to define and give specific meaning to the word reasonable use and other statutes or constitutional provisions that talk about public trust. Public trust is something for the benefit of all, as a common good. And so that's lurking out there. And so it's all in flux. But I would say that would be an avenue to make more rational the current water rights regime. And the Water Board has already said that if the drought continues, they will be issuing restrictions even to senior water rights holders. So this is very lively and in being right now in terms of water authorities in California.
All right. How does this fit in the context of the paradigm for California? If the last two generations were built on the foundation of relatively cheap land, relatively cheap water, the dream of aerospace technology, Hollywood, the lifestyle, sort of more recently, the Endangered Species Act and environmental consciousness entered our community, some balance against destruction of habitat and how we live our lives. Are we entering a different era for California? What is the next 50 years? Have we reached a limit on growth and population? What should one think of as that new paradigm for California?
Well, let's look at the historic context. For over 10,000 years, the population in California didn't exceed approximately 300,000, maybe more, but not anything near where it is now at 39 million. That's 10,000 years. California really got going when Portola got the command from Carlos III in 1769 to occupy San Diego and occupy Monterey. And so the Spanish came, the Mexicans took power back from the Spain, and then the Bear Republic and the Americans took over, and we've been going ever since. We've added 39 million people, but we haven't been going 10,000 years. So this is an experiment. We don't know what the ultimate output is. Now, some people don't think we live or don't reflect on the fact that we are a part of a complex web of life. There's a pattern of interactive loops and feedback loops that, with all these subsystems of which we're one. And the web of life can be undermined. The food chain can collapse. We're finding this in dead parts of the ocean. The environment is not an amenity. The system, the hydrologic system, the natural systems, the whole evolutionary result of what we now experience is something that is all tied together in living interactions and forms. Now, for the first time ever in the whole history of the planet. We have 7.2 billion, probably going to go to 9 or 10, or some people even say 12 billion. We never had cars before. Now we have 1 billion, probably going to go to 2 or maybe 3 billion. We have all this coal. We're burning down half the rainforest. So we are altering this planet with this incredible power of science, technology, and economic advance. Now, the natural pattern of life, of which we are only a small part, it functions according to absolute rules. We have to adjust to that. So now, if California is going to have 50 million people, they're not going to live the same way that the native people live, much less the people today. We're going to have to be more elegant. That means you have to extract less material and get more energy and value in the throughput. You can't just extract, move it through, and waste. You have to find a more elegant way of relating to material things, and you have to use them with great sensitivity and sophistication. And that's why in our water system, we're not going back to the native days. It's not pristine. It's highly engineered with the lakes and the dams and the this and that, the canals. I mean, it's incredible how engineered this whole state is in terms of water. So the path forward is not going backwards, but going forward with more sophisticated engineering that takes into account not just economics, but takes into account the ecological feedback loops of which we are embedded. So that's why this is a moment where you can call it I don't know if it's a new paradigm, but it has to be survivable. It has to take account of the physical and biological constraints that we're not going to change. There are certain laws of nature that you don't change. And as we put more people with more impact on this constant natural environment, we run up against certain limits. We can accommodate more people. I believe we can certainly take another 10 million. But we have to do it in a different way. The cars, I've called for a 50% reduction in petroleum use in the next 15 years. That's a different paradigm. We also have a goal of 50% renewable energy. Before 2010, the utilities were told you have to have 20% renewable electricity. Said can't be done. Well, they're at 24% right now. So these things can be done, but we have to direct our attention to it. We have to invest the capital and the human power of intellect and effort to get it done. So when you pick up your paper, you know, there's a lot of news. There's the news about ISIS, there's the news about the Ukraine, there's the news about China and Japan and the police department and this thing and that thing. But things like climate change and habitat destruction and species extinction, they're not news, but they are conditions that are changing that will affect all of our lives. They just don't affect our lives on a daily 24-hour clock. And so the test here is not so much a new paradigm, but it's a deeper insight into the nature of what our reality is and marshaling the best of our thinking, both by way of values and science, to adjust humankind to the immutable natural laws rather than the other way around. And if you look at most species that have successfully evolved and are still in the game of life, they change, they mutate themselves. They don't try to change the world. They change to get on the side of nature. And human beings will have to do the same thing. We will have to change our ways of how, maybe not how our chromosomes work, but at least how we eat and how we clothe and recreate and do all the other things that we do. We're going to have to create what I'd call a more elegant way of interfacing with the rest of nature.
Let me, if I may, take the last few minutes we have, and on behalf of our readers, ask a couple of questions. And I apologize in advance, they can be very direct. So a San Diego Union Tribune reader. I would like to ask Governor Brown if he thinks the bullet train construction project isn't going to use vast amounts of water. And wouldn't it be better to use that money on the water crisis, because without water in our state, not many people are going to be staying here, let alone traveling through it. We can't survive without water. We can survive without the bullet train.
You can say the same thing about almonds or steak or showers. we have a complex life, and it's not one variable that we try to optimize. If we get our 10 million, as we think we will, the I-5 is going to get crowded. The roads are already crowded in Los Angeles. You've got to find a more efficient way. An electrified high-speed rail will bring Bakersfield right within the economic orbit of Southern California. It will bring Fresno very close to Silicon Valley. This is something that other countries, China, Japan, Italy, Spain, Germany, they've all concluded that high-speed rail has a role in a modern, sophisticated transportation system. So if we do one thing, we can't do something else. We have to do many things. And so not building the train doesn't save water. You're just going to have a lot more cars. You're going to need more runway space at LAX and San Francisco and Oakland. And the net expense economically is lower with high-speed rail to move the same number of people. And because it'll be electrified and be 100% renewable energy, it will have far less impact on the environment. So for all those reasons, I think it makes a lot of sense. Now, when you build houses and you get more people, that's more water too. So it's a very dicey question. How do we say, you know, less people, less almonds, less trains, less cars? We have to manage with this increasingly difficult challenge of population, technology consumption versus nature, and how we get on the right side of the way the world works.
A Los Angeles Times reader. We have always been water conservative and don't know where we can cut any more. We shut water off between washings and rinsings at a trickle while washing other things. We use our laundry water for a drip line of our old coastal oak trees in our little backyard. We have flagstone in our tiny courtyard and have built 3 small raised bed gardens for organic veggies. While cutting our water use even more out of fear of potential unaffordable water fines, even those plants are dying. We follow the rules. We're both seniors, one retired, still working. It's getting to the point where we can hardly afford to live here. What should we do?
Well, the 25% goal so far has been workable. And I've been to different parts of the state. In Santa Clara, they're responding very well. And it's a work in progress. So, I mean, I hear the difficulty of that, and I'd have to understand it better. But there's no doubt that we can use water more efficiently. Now, I don't know about every case that can be presented, but there's a lot of water that we know from rainwater, we know from stormwater, we know from gray water. There's a lot of recycling that are available. So in reverse osmosis in the Central Valley for more brackish water. So we can't, I hear what they're saying, but we're going to stay the course of improving and rationalizing our water use. And as we hear stories and responses, we'll adjust and we'll adapt. So that's an anecdote more than evidence, but to the extent that there's some real hardship there, I certainly would take it into consideration in what we're doing.
Well, you've been very generous with your time this evening. I think people are still sitting on the edge of their chairs, and I think the appropriate thing would be if you have any final comments, thoughts you wish to share to conclude our conversation this evening.
I would just say that the fact that water is now even more important than the economy in people's minds currently is a very important milestone, because it means that that which is more fundamental is attracting significant attention. And water is fundamental to our lives and to our well-being. So there's a lot to learn. We have a lot of adaptation ahead of us, innovation, and I think that's the way we ought to look at it. I heard the story, I don't know whether it's true or not, but that the city fathers of London around the turn of the century were worried about where they put all the manure from their carriages, the horse-drawn carriages. Well, then they invented the automobile, and the manure problem went away. So we don't know quite how we're going to make this all work, but with a little bit of patience and a lot of collaboration and some good science, I'm confident that we can deal with our water problems in a very successful way and keep the California dream alive unto many, many generations to come.
I want to thank you. You've been generous with your time. Certainly, I'm better informed. Your leadership on this issue is welcomed. We're going to do everything we can to support and continue to engage and inform. Unless anyone thinks the governor's not a miracle worker, he's told me he's going to be on a flight out of LAX from downtown in 45 minutes. So I'm pretty confident the water thing's going to be easy.
I do have the 7:45 flight to Oakland.
Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, good. Thank you.
We hope you found this program enlightening, and remember, you can watch it in its entirety at kcet.org/water. We'd like to thank our partners, the Los Angeles Times, USC, and the Governor's Office. And special thanks to KNBC for providing satellite services. For everyone at SoCal Connected, I'm Val Zavala. Good night. SoCal Connected is made possible through the generous support of the Amundsen Foundation, serving the Los Angeles community since 1952. The Maddox Brown Foundation, and by Chapman University, offering personalized education in the arts, education, science, business, and more.